Chapter 16. The Charge of the Light Horse Irregulars. In looking back on those later years of my association with the greatest detective the world has ever known, I cannot but wonder if madness had not become my lot. Here I stood on the west bank of the Nile, but a few miles from the stark and foreboding cliffs beyond which stretched the vast Sahara. I was better than 300 miles from Cairo, and that city was by design and style of life a million miles from where I belonged. My habitat, by training and inclination, was Harley Street, where my conflicts should have been women with real or imaginary ailments, and snivelling tots who needed to have their noses blown. Instead I stood beside a scurvy-looking band of ruffians, as sinister in appearance as their steed were magnificent. What knew I of them, or their leader either, despite his open and ingratiating manner? And yet there had been that moment in Luxor, where he had spoken of Holmes, and I had seen that flash in his eyes. A picture plucked from the scrapbook of time and projected like a magic lantern slide onto the mirror of his mind. I had seen that look before, in the green eyes of Wakefield Orloff and the brown ones of von Shalloway of the German police, in the bland eyes of Slim Gilligan and the roguish ones of Burlington Bertie. I'd have staked my last shilling that the sheik belonged to that esoteric fraternity, the Friends of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Upon our arrival at the Arabs' camp, that grimy Bedouin who had assisted in my bandaging of the sheik descended upon me, all grins and jabbering in Arabic. "Mahout is quite taken by you, Dr. Watson," said the chieftain. "He refers to you as the man of magic." I would have used I would have use for the arts of Cagliostro at this moment, I admitted, looking towards the towering cliff that seemed so near. "Nightfall is upon us. Can we make the valley now?" For an answer the sheik swung into the saddle of a superb Arabian stallion, signalling to his men as he did so. Mahout, who seemed to derive a savage joy at the prospect of action, assisted me onto another Arabian, and in a trice the entire group were mounted and ready. "Our horses are sure-footed, Doctor, and the rocky terrain we shall soon encounter holds no terrors for them. But be alert, for Arabians swerve quickly." The sheik had no doubt noted the difficulty with which I had gained my seat. As we started out at a slow canter, which accelerated into a flowing gallop, I felt comforted that my saddle was much larger than the English type. There was but one rein, a curb undoubtedly, which made things easier for me, and I tried not to hold in my animal too tightly, but let it take the lead, which it did, matching speed with the sheik's horse. The set of tropicals that I wore featured large coat pockets, rather like a bush jacket. I transferred my trusty Smith Webley, which I had with me fortunately, shoving it into my belt where it would be more available. The band of fierce-looking Arabs that accompanied me made my firearm unnecessary in anything but a major crisis, especially since every one of my unusual companions was armed to the teeth. One's mind plays strange tricks. Here I was racing over flat and lush terrain, for all the world like my hero, General Gordon, surveying his defences at Khartoum before that ill-fated and final battle. What was I thinking of? I blush to mention that I was wondering what the sedate members of the Bagatelle Club might think if they could see me now. The graceful gallop of our steeds ate up distance, and in a short while the ground began to slant upwards. Fertile soil had faded away to sand, which was now replaced by rock, though the narrow road we followed was reasonably clear of obstacles and passable. Ahead of us loomed the stark cliffs of the Theban hills, and I knew that we were upon the entrance to the remote valley. We curved to the right in the lee of the cliffs, and our pace slackened to a fast trot as we followed a serpentine course. Then the valley was before us. But a short way back the land was cultivated, and there were date palms and greenery, and the black rich soil brought by the Nile floods. Now all was limestone and flint, with naught growing, a place of desolation. It was much larger than I had anticipated, though I sensed this rather than noted it visually, since the sun was now gone and the last traces of it in the sky had disappeared. The moon was low and its light not revealing, and I wondered how the horses picked their way between boulders and outcroppings, but they did, for the desert was their element. Obviously, this strange place was the result of violent flood waters that through eons of time had cut this crease in the cliffs that had become the place of the dead. Then we heard it. There was no mistaking the sound. Gunfire. The entire party reined up and we paused to consider the next move. The sheik was gazing into the darkness, and he exchanged words with several of his followers before turning his bearded visage towards me. A rather brisk battle, doctor, in the vicinity of a half moon of graves, almost due west, with a small-scale war in progress. I did not feel that the withholding of information was practical. Holmes is in search of an undiscovered tomb of one of the pharaohs. Possibly he and the troopers found it, only to discover that it was guarded, hence the gunfire. What now? I regarded him with a startled expression. Why, we reconnoiter the situation. Well said, was his brief reply, and he whirled his horse and pressed forward at such a rate that I was hard pressed to keep up with him. Behind us, the Bedouins formed a tight group, their eyes wide and their teeth flashing in the moonlight. Close by, Mahout was sniffing at the air as if to catch the welcome smell of gunpowder. I recalled tales I had read of the American West. Was it not General Lou Wallace who had described the Indians of the American frontier, such as the Sioux and the Cheyennes, as the finest light cavalry in the world? That may be, but it occurred to me that the horse was not indigenous to the Americans, but came by way of the Spanish conquistadors, whereas I was with those who had ridden their mounts since the memory of man, and at the moment would have matched my companions against any mounted irregulars in the world. The sound of the firing was louder now, and the sheik slowed his horse to a walk and then reined in at the top of a crest. From his saddlebag he secured a very modern pair of binoculars, with which he surveyed the scene ahead of us. "The tombs of Seti First and Ramses Tenth lie there," he said, indicating a southerly direction. "The battle is, as you can see by the gun flashes, to the right, near the tomb of Ramses Sixth," I said, automatically accepting the binoculars from him. I noted that he gave me a surprised look. "Quite right, Doctor. How did—" "Something I heard," I explained quickly, viewing the night scene. The moon had risen and visibility had improved. We were, I judged, in the western end of the valley, and ahead the desolate Eocene limestone and bedrock slanted upwards towards a projecting bastion of rock. Well up the slope were heaps of stone, removed no doubt from the numerous tombs of the area, and interspersed with faults and fissures. The flashes of gunfire indicated that the Scottish soldiers and Holmes were shooting upwards towards the rocky escarpment that dominated the section. Well hidden behind large boulders just below the crest, another group was returning their fire. Lowering the glasses, I noticed that the sheik's head was shaking in a manner that registered disapproval of the scene before us. "The Queen's soldiers are using their standard Enfield rifles." "Of course," I muttered. To me a shot was a shot, but such was not the case with my experienced companion. "The others have Winchester repeating carbines, the 12-shot model, I'd say, along with some Martini rifles." I just stared at him, amazed that he could deduce so much purely by sound. Then it passed through my mind that Holmes on several occasions had done the same relative to handguns. "My point is, Doctor, that the troops can scarcely risk a rush up the slope towards their concealed adversaries. The Winchesters would chop them to pieces." There was a heavier boom in the distance, and I surveyed the area of conflict again through the glasses. "Why doesn't Gray pull his men back? They could regroup and attack from another angle." Another louder boom punctuated the sheik's reply. "On top of one of those rocks is an elephant gun. Being long range, it could make things costly if the British retreated." "Then they are pinned down, and the moonlight is getting brighter every moment, which does not improve the situation." I peered through the binoculars, my mind desperately searching for inspiration. What would General Sternways have thought if faced with a tactical problem such as this? The general had regaled Holmes and myself with stories of his quite illustrious career on several occasions after the sleuth had recovered his daughter's famous pendant of Ceylonese rubies. It was the geography I viewed that prompted a sudden rush of words. Sheik, could we not circle to the south and come upon that hillock from the rear? Whoever is up there is dug in below the crest, and if we charged over it, we'd certainly have them at a disadvantage. True, replied the desert chieftain with a quick smile of approval. But consider, we could have them between two fires, but would be exposed to two fires ourselves. That can be remedied, I said with confidence. From the side pocket of my jacket I extracted my notebook. That was with me always. The pen with which I had written endless prescriptions was of course in my handkerchief pocket. Sheik, could not one of your men make his way upwards to the British with a note? At a signal, Holmes could have the troopers hold their fires as we attack from beyond the hill. "The cry of the jackal," responded the Arabian promptly. "The gunfire has frightened them from the area, so there is no possibility of an error, and Mahood is quite good at emulating the sound of the carrion beast." As he spoke, I scrawled rapidly on a piece of notepaper, trying to summon the words that would explain our plan briefly. The sheik was rattling to one of his men, and I caught the name Holmes repeated at least 4 times. The Bedouin dismounted, secured the message from my hands, and darted forward into the open, flitting from boulder to boulder and making use of every furrow cut by primeval floods in the rocky terrain to approach the Sutherland Argylls undetected. Obviously our messenger was well aware of the menace of the long-range elephant gun and taking suitable precautions. The rest of our party had also dismounted now and were busy affixing pieces of leather to their horses' hooves, securing them with thongs of rawhide. As I vacated my saddle, Mahout performed that feat for my steed. With a cunning bred of centuries of desert warfare, the Bedouins were muffling the hoofs so that our progress over the bedrock of the area would not be revealed by sound. This sensible precaution prompted a sudden thought. "Sheik," I stammered, indicating towards the soldiers. "Your messenger. Will not the troopers mistake him for the enemy? When he is close enough he will call out Holmes's name. Surely that will alert the British that he is friend, not foe." I was reassured. Holmes will take care of it. Now we remounted and were able to follow the crest that concealed us from the area of hostilities in a southerly direction, and at a good rate. The ground sloped away and kept us under cover as we rode in a half circle to approach, as planned, from the rear. Rifle fire, punctuated at infrequent intervals by the ominous boom of the elephant gun, continued. I imagined that Colonel Grey was keeping the opposition busy, hoping for a cloud over the now brilliant moon that would allow him to dispatch a man to secure reinforcements and extricate his party from the difficult situation in which they found themselves. Well, Colonel, I thought with some pride, the reinforcements are already on the scene, as you will learn shortly. I noted the riders around me checking their weapons and began to wonder just what I would do in the coming melee, and also if this stratagem would work. General Sternways had stated more than once that the effectiveness of a sorry, cavalry charge was in part visual. The spectre of a wall of horsemen thundering towards a position was enough to strike terror in the stoutest defender's heart. But, he had added, mounted units were highly susceptible to ambush, and a sound knowledge of the terrain was essential. Dear me, all we knew was that we were to charge over a crest of stony outcropping, and what lay beyond this natural fortification and the boulders sheltering the snipers, we knew not. At that moment, my morale was at a low ebb. Suddenly the sound of gunfire, now quite close, picked up its tempo. The messenger has arrived, I thought. Gray has his men pouring it on to cover our approach, and capture the complete attention of the enemy. Had I been truly of the military, I would have considered a commendation for Colonel Gray. My thoughts were cut short. The moment was upon us. The sheik and his men were grouped at the base of an incline, and I thanked my stars that we had arrived undetected at our present position. The chieftain and his riders were regarding me quizzically, and suddenly it dawned on me that they were awaiting orders. I was in charge of this mad escapade. A physician, a man of peace, trained to save life and not take it, was expected to head a group of desert nomads in a quasi-military maneuver in this remote, dried-out valley of death. My heart quailed. Then a voice drummed in my ears. "This motley crew is here on your errand, old chap. And if the rush is blunted and the field is lost, it is you who must accept the consequences and blame. So on with it, you bag of aging bones." "Sheik," I whispered with more conviction than I felt, "we'll spread out and rush the top in a line, which will give us maximum firepower as we clear the ridge and possibly mislead the enemy as to our numbers as well. Have Mahout give the cry of the jackal, then the British fire should cease, and I'll give the signal." Already the chieftain was relaying in Arabic soft words to his men to form a row of white steeds, which they did with alacrity. Bathed by the luminous moon, their white robes fanned by a faint wind, and seated on their seats, with nostrils flared, they made an impressive sight, pictured against these stark cliffs in the background. The moment produced an adrenaline flow into my blood, and for a wild second I imagined that this villainous-looking crew was transformed into the cream of chivalry, and that we could charge inexorably to the gates of hell and back. I scarce knew what Holmes was up to, but the cause had to be right. and God supports the forces of light and those with the fastest guns. Mahout's evil-looking mouth opened and the howl of the jackal rose from his lips. In a moment there was a sudden cessation in the heavy firing, and I knew this was it. Seizing my trusty Webley in one hand, I rose in my stirrups, one arm aloft to lower and signal the charge. But my mount, feeling my weight shifted forward, took this to be the moment and bolted for the top of the hill. I slammed back in my saddle, and from my surprised mouth there came a cry that I am told was a satisfactory blending of the rebel yell of Stuart's Confederate cavalry with the ear-splitting cry of one of the chief Crazy Horse's mounted braves. I think the Arabs were as startled as I was, but they picked up the refrain, and we cleared the crest, for all the world like a mass of screaming centaurs, infected with the madness of whirling dervishes. My steed held his lead over the rest, and we made the top in advance of the main body. I had cocked my weapon, an insane thing to do on horseback, and was bouncing like a rubber ball at every leap of my noble Arabian. As a result I lost both my stirrups, and my Webley blasted off into the night, not aimed at anything. I shoved the weapon into my belt again, gripping the pommel of the saddle desperately, but to no avail. I was thrown loose from my horse, but still clung to the saddle with a grip fused by raw panic. Both feet hit the ground, and I bounced with my heels flying upwards, and was amazed when they came in contact with two Egyptians, who must have been working their way back up the hill. They were not alone, having two companions, who at the moment were being run down by my horse, whose mouth was open and snapping at anything within range. The two I had hit with my heels went rolling down the hill, and my steed's progress was impeded by the men in his path. Then my feet hit the ground again as my Arabian rose on his hind legs to stamp at those unfortunates before him. Nothing could shake my grip on the saddle, since I felt it was my last link with sanity in a world gone mad. My body slid sideways, and I was hanging by the pommel with my legs on the steed's vertically inclined rump. Then the Arabian's front legs came down, and there was a cry of anguish from those beneath his devastating hoofs. But the beast's impact with the ground snapped me forward, and of a sudden I was back in the saddle, and my mount and I were plunging down the hillside towards the rear of the rocks that had been the sniper's lair. But there was no answering fire, or men to shoot at, or run down. Streaming from the rocks and down the incline was a band of turbaned rascals, whose hands were raised, or who were industriously throwing away their guns as they rushed towards the wall of bayonets that had come forth to intercept them. Casting frenzied looks over their soldiers, they made a dash for the Scottish soldiers, as though their only hope of salvation was behind the thin red line. By this time, lurching in my saddle like an inebriated man, I managed to slow down my mount, and Mahout was beside me to seize the birdie. He peppered the air with a flow of Arabic, liberally interspersed with the only word I could understand, which was Allah. Then the sheik was by my side. A memorable engagement. Your running down those men near the crest rescued us from a potential crossfire, and the enemy has been captured without the loss of a man. No doubt I sputtered something, but I imagine it was unintelligible. My good doctor, I read that you served with the Northumberland Fusiliers, but I misunderstood your function with the gallant regiment. I thought you were with the medical corps. An obvious error. Before I could explain to the sheik that his original idea had been completely correct, Holmes had raced up towards us and was assisting me from the saddle. Dear Watson, I doubt if I shall ever carry firearms again. You outdid yourself as a marksman on this night. I could only gaze at him dumbly as I fingered portions of my legs in hopes that they were still intact. Right after the signal of the jackal's howl, we ceased firing, of course, and then you came over the crest, their sharpshooter, who had made life hellish for us with his long-range piece of ordnance, suddenly straightened up on the top of the rock that was his lair and looked backwards. Then I heard the bark of your Webley. You caught him right on, Watson, and he went tumbling from his perch. The others of your group were just appearing as you rode down and dispersed the four men who had gone back up the hill for ammunition, no doubt. It was a chilling sight, with bodies falling right and left before your onslaught, and you were moving so fast you appeared half man, half beast. Colonel Grey joined us during Holmes's words. It was a combination of things that did in those beggars for fair, he stated, indicating behind him, where his troops were securing the thoroughly quailed enemy. Half of them are shivering and muttering about Anubis, and won't even look back upon the hill after the howl of the jackal and the doctor's appearance. And most unusual it was. They must have seized on the thought that 'twas the jackal god of the dead who was descending upon them. Took all the fight out of them, it did. In a wary manner I began to inform the group of their host of misconceptions, but was not allowed to. The results were important and the execution of little interest now. It was Holmes, calm and assured as always, who took charge. The great sleuth had made note of the sheik, and he acknowledged his presence now. "It has been some time," he stated laconically. "Indeed, Mr. Holmes, I trust Allah has smiled on your efforts during the interval." "He smiled tonight. Your presence was most opportune. Dr. Watson, to whom I owe much, enlisted the aid of my band and myself." My friend's keen eyes rested on me for a moment with surprise, fighting a twinkle for supremacy. "I've said on occasion that you amaze me, old chap, and this is no exception. But now, because of your triumph, fate has indeed lent us a hand. and we'd best move fast to take full advantage of it. As the Sheik and Colonel Grey regarded him intently, I could see my friend's machine-like mind sorry, sorting the pieces and placing them in order for presentation. His gaze centered on the Colonel. These Scottish troops, but recently from their homeland, have only a vague idea of where they are, I believe. As the Colonel nodded, a smile of satisfaction touched Holmes's lips. "We shall keep it that way. When they return to their regiment and are dispatched to India, the story is that they had a brief skirmish with rebellious tribesmen, and was terminated by the arrival of a friendly band of Arabians. I think that sounds plausible enough." The Sheikh contributed some information. "The men you have captured, they are from Kurna." He spat expressively on the rock, "the place of the grave robbers which is close by to the south and east." "I see," said Holmes. Then his attention shifted back to Gray. "Colonel, have your men keep close watch on the prisoners, for we can't have any escape." "My men will gladly assist," said the Sheik with a grim smile. "They have no love for the thieves of Kurna." Holmes accepted this. "Then what is to be seen here shall be viewed by just the four of us," he said. "If you can secure torches, Colonel, we have some exploring to do." It was shortly thereafter that we left the temporary camp set up by the Sutherland Argyle and their unusual allies, the Sheiks' band. At Holmes's request, Colonel Grey, who was familiar with the valley, led us towards the tomb of Ramses VI, which, according to the cipher of the Italian Pusa, was our marker in this strange rocky fastness. What Holmes sought he found close to the entrance of the tomb of the sixth Ramses. It was a narrow opening in the valley floor, a short distance away, shielded by a low mound of rock that concealed it from the passing eye. It was certainly unprepossessing, but there was a stone step, unmistakably, and below it another. Holmes ignited one of the torches Gray had brought, descended a short distance, and then turned back towards the three of us with a strange look up on his face. "16 steps downward, I make it, right through solid rock. Now we shall learn what it is the Chinaman found." He turned again towards the tomb, and we eagerly followed in his footsteps. The sunken stairway descended steeply, I estimated at a 45-degree angle. At the bottom there had been a doorway that was evident, but it had been removed, and the torchlight revealed a passageway that slanted downward without steps. We pressed down the passage and progressed about 30 feet, where we found ourselves face to face with a door of stone blocks, festooned by seals that, as Gray explained, were proof that the tomb had not been violated by plunderers. This remark promoted amazement within Holmes. "Do you say this doorway has not been opened?" Colonel Grey shrugged. "I am no Egyptologist, sir, but from the seals and the way the stones fit, I would think that it has been this way for thousands of years. In the light of the torches, it was obvious that the sleuth was thinking intently. He came this far and no further. Not one unplundered tomb has been found in all of Egypt, and the Chinaman got this far and then stopped. I fear that tears it as far as my theory is concerned. Holmes was speaking as though to himself, and it was the sheik who broke in on his thoughts. What did you expect to find? That the Chinaman, for obviously this archaeological treasure was uncovered at his instigation, had opened this crypt, untouched throughout the ages, and found one or more of the golden tablets. The desert chieftain's bearded face was expressive, and it was plain to see that Holmes's words struck no responsive chord with him. "Actually," admitted the sleuth, faced with the cold light of the fact, "my theory seems a bit far-fetched, and incorrect, if we are to believe Colonel Grey here. Therefore, let us backtrack, gentlemen. If Chu San Fu did not open the tomb, I see no reason why we should, and many reasons why we should not." I confess it was with a sense of disappointment that I followed my friend back up the strange corridor, hewn from solid rock, and mounted the 16 ageless steps towards the desert night sky. What secrets lay beyond that doorway that led us to the past? Something about that thought had a familiar ring, but other plans were brewing and my attention was distracted. As we stood on the valley floor at the entrance to one tomb, and surrounded by a multitude of others, Holmes was sunk in thought and seemed despondent. The sheik expressed a reasonable question. "What would you have us do?" At the same time, Colonel Grey inquired, "What now?" Their simultaneous and same question drew a half-smile from Holmes, and shook him from his mood of the moment. "We are holding the tiger's tail, gentlemen. For the good of the Empire it would be better if this tomb had not been found. What I would like to do is push back time and have it remain undiscovered, at least until the present crisis is past." I was incapable of following Holmes's reasoning, but the sheik found nothing unusual in his words. "It can be done. Colonel Grey's British troops can seal off the valley using excuse of military manoeuvres. The Egyptians hired to guard the place can be pressed into service to refill the passageway and stairs, and in a short while the entrance will be no more. A simple job in this place where there has been so much excavation." "What of the workers?" I asked, and then regretted it. For expediency I might better not have touched on the subject. The sheik's wise smile served as a reminder that this was another part of the world to me, with customs and habits that I could never completely understand. "My men and I will leave for the south and the campfires of our home. If we take others with us, it will not be the first time that their lot will be no worse than it is now." His words were reasonable and reassuring, but I sensed considerable elasticity in them as regards to who, sorry, what would actually happen. However, Holmes did not seem disposed to inquire further, and I decided not to, either. Our journey into the Valley of the Kings had been a bizarre affair, fraught as it proved with danger and complications, but its resolution was simple enough. The following day, Holmes and I went with the Scottish soldiers and Grey to the entrance of the valley, and leaving the colonel with the men, made our way back to Luxor. Prior to our departure, the sheik and Holmes had a private conversation that I would have given much to have been in on. The connection between the desert chieftain and the great detective puzzled me to no end. Actually, I tried to lead conversations round to this matter on a number of occasions, but got nowhere and remained ignorant of the situation until '96, when the reconquest of the Sudan began under Kitchener. Holmes's mood of thoughtfulness, induced by the regrouping of facts, was supplanted by an air of impatience and activity. We wasted no time returning to the Nile and crossing it, where he made fast tracks for the Luxor Army headquarters to dispatch cables. Then we gathered our belongings to return to Cairo. Gray was to follow on a later train. En route, Holmes explained that he had persuaded the military to hasten orders for the Sutherland Argyle's departure to India, and I could understand his concern regarding this. He wanted the troopers that had accompanied us on a transport before they could wander round Luxor and mention their singular engagement in a strange valley and its unusual conclusion. That Holmes wished all knowledge of the unknown tomb suppressed completely was most apparent, though his concern regarding this eluded me. Through the years, he and I had played many games regarding the progress of a case, and I must admit that he kept me on my toes with his varied moods and moments of loquacity, followed by taciturn periods where he was so sunk in thought that he could barely summon a good morning, and at times could not or would not do that. However, there is a limit to one's patience, and on the train back to the Egyptian capital I determined to wrestle some sense from him regarding recent events and his apparent change of ideas. Much to my surprise, I found him not averse to discussing the case. After due consideration, my good fellow, I must chide myself for being overly dramatic. This ancient land and its history is a never-ending mystery. But let us pass over that, for it has to be facts that are our sole sure tools. We know that Chu San Fu is a deep-seated rascal who, sorry, and a raving megalomaniac as well. Not an inappropriate mental state for a would-be empire builder, I must add. This statement was accompanied by a thin smile. He has caused a groundswell that has passed through the Mohammedan areas, and will evidently reach its crest in Cairo at a meeting of the leaders of this widespread religion. Now, the Chinaman cannot pass himself off as a true blue follower of the Prophet, for Mohammedanism has made no inroads in the Far East. Therefore he has some other scheme in mind, for it is his own aggrandizement that he is planning. Of that we can be sure. You recall that the hieroglyphics and the secret writings as well are recondite inasmuch as they reproduce visually not only words but ideas. The golden tablets matter has distracted me no end, for they are, as of now, the only exhibits of the secret writings in any detail, Andrade being the one man who can translate them, I added as Holmes fell into a silence. Do not forget memory, Max, old fellow. I pictured this tool of Chusanfu as capable of deciphering them, and I may still be right about that. Now don't laugh at me, but I did entertain the thought that these secret writings, until now undecipherable, might contain the key to some unknown power that would provide an explanation for the colossal monuments created by ancient Egypt, the construction of which we cannot as yet explain. Good heavens, Holmes! You feared that some age-old force or process, possibly astronomical in source, might fall into the hands of a criminal madman? It does sound like the awesome villainy for some transpontine piece, does it not? But the idea did occur, perhaps inspired by the unexplained mysteries on every hand in this strange land. I am much relieved to be proved wrong. But how do you deduce that you are? The tomb we found was unopened. Were Chu Sanfu in pursuit of an ancient force, would he not have forced the door to that crypt in hopes of finding one or more additional golden tablets in the unpillaged tomb? Unable to detect a flaw in this reasoning, I nodded. So we must return to basics. Chu Sanfu is here in Egypt to incite the mausoleums of a religious crusade, another rising of the crescent. Of that I am sure. His possession of the sacred sword is enough to gain, nay command, the attention of Mohammedans throughout the world. It is the Chinaman's ticket to the show, as it were. What have the golden tablets to do with this plan? In keeping with the parlance of these lurid American novels that you read, what is his secret weapon? Well, Holmes, and why would he, clued by Prusa's cipher, discover the tomb, dig to the very entrance, and then abandon the project? That makes no sense at all. Hmm, you did mention American stories. This entire matter of tombs is rather reminiscent of Western folklore relative to lost mines. Holmes had been gazing out the window of our car and suddenly turned to me. In what way? There's the matter of the lost Dutchman mine in Arizona, you know. The prospector who discovered it said to have brought in ore of an amazingly high grade, but he died or disappeared, and the mine has never been found. They are still looking for it, by the way. Then there's the lost Englishman's mine, rather the same story. A remittance man supposedly found the mother lode, but then, at the death of his brother, was called back to his homeland to assume the family title, and he never returned. That I find unbelievable, said Holmes, and a bit too close to the Dutchman's story. Personally, I think both tales were inspired by some glib confidence man in hopes of doing a salting job. Can we go over that last part again, Watson? Memory caused me to chuckle, and then I was prodded by the finger of guilt. See here, Holmes, the Empire faces a crisis, and I'm relating tall tales that may have no basis in truth. But stories have a root source, good chap, and sometimes it is of interest. To inform me as to this salting that you refer to, well, it was a swindle scheme, pure and simple, an attempt to sell a worthless mine at an inflated price, though it backfired on one rascal. Happened in Colorado, you see. Chap called Tabor was an unsuccessful proprietor of a general store who grub-stacked two miners. Grub-stacked? You have picked up a most colorful vocabulary. Supplied to prospectors with goods for a share in their findings. Oh, well, the two men that he extended credit to discovered the little Pittsburgh mine, which was the richest find in Colorado up to that point. Within a short time, Tabor bought out his partners and became a multimillionaire, but his sudden affluence did not increase his business acumen. He would buy anything, and soon became known as an easy mark. A what? To put it bluntly, Holmes, a sucker. Some fellow in a far-off place called Leadville had a mine that had proved worthless, so he planted valuable ore in it, a process known as salting, and then took Tabor to view the premises, making sure that he found the salted ore, I take it. Exactly. Tabor fell for the bait and purchased the mine, paid better than $100,000 for it. As I recall, I noted that this story promoted some humor in you, but it seems as a tale of chicanery to me. It's not over, Holmes, I said somewhat smugly. Tabor put a crew to work on that mine, and his foreman reported back to the tycoon that they had been had, that the mine was worthless. But Tabor was undaunted. "Dig some more," he said. "I have a great name for it, the Matchless." Ever hopeful, I see. Possibly inspired. They dug 10 feet down and discovered a vein that made the little Pittsburgh seem pale by comparison. The Matchless Mine financed HAW Tabor's honeymoon to Europe, during which he is rumored to have spent $10 million. Holmes's jaw actually dropped. "My dear Watson, the sum you mention is mind-boggling. I wonder what the man who salted the mine—" He was in the process of lighting a cigarette and held the match for a long moment, its flickering light reflected in his keen eyes. Then he completed the operation slowly. "Salted the mine, by Godfrey, Watson, that's it. At the risk of being repetitious, may I say again that you do possess the innate ability to say the right thing at the right time. Now I must think." I could not get another word from him during our return trip to Cairo. He was in such deep study that I did not dare try.